They say history is written by the victors. But what about the stories of those who were silenced? The legacy of slavery remains so profound and timeless that it affects countless lives today. In this video on the horrifying facts of slave breeding farms, we'll explore the forgotten aspects of human suffering, where lives were commodified and souls torn apart. We'll unearth the shocking truths behind these illicit operations by exposing the deliberate manipulation and heart-wrenching consequences inflicted upon enslaved black people. From forced incest to sexual exploitation and gruesome labor, we'll navigate this harrowing journey, revealing the chilling realities of slave breeding farms that history tried to bury. As we bear witness to this painful past, we honor the resilience of our enslaved ancestors and ensure that their stories serve as a rallying cry for justice and continuous remembrance. After the Atlantic slave trade was abolished on March 2, 1807, some states in the United States began a terrible and exploitative practice called slave breeding or sex farms. This cruel act took place in the states where slavery was legal. The selfish slave owners wanted to make more money, so they forced male slaves to have relationships with women or young girls, even if they didn't want to. They also forcefully made female slaves pregnant, and they favored women or girls who could have many children. All of this was done to increase the number of slaves without having to buy them or deal with the shortage of workers after the Atlantic slave trade was stopped. During that time, slaves were treated like objects, just like farm animals. Their owners saw them as valuable possessions and treated them as such. To protect their own financial interests, slaveholders made laws about slavery and the slave trade. Unfortunately, the enslaved individuals had no rights at all, similar to how cows or horses have no rights. This was famously stated in the Dred Scott v. Sanford case by the U.S. Supreme Court, which said that they didn't have any rights that white men were required to respect. On large plantations, enslaved families were often separated and given different types of work. Men would usually work together in the fields, while overseers decided what tasks they would do based on their physical abilities. The system was designed to dehumanize the slaves, who had no say in what work they did or their personal situations. It was a difficult and oppressive environment for them, and they were treated as properties rather than human beings. In Richmond, Virginia, and the Maryland Eastern Shore, there were breeding farms that were significant in the slave economy. These farms were essential parts of the system. Richmond, being a port city, played a crucial role in this trade. Every month, a large number of enslaved people were exported from Richmond to the states in the South and West. Surprisingly, during that time, slavery, not tobacco, was Virginia's main domestic crop. Enslaved people were transported using rail and boats, which helped them arrive in better condition, allowing sellers to ask for higher prices. The slaves' owners made money by selling their human property at high prices. The whole system of slavery was mainly about making money, and the breeding farms were profitable in this terrible system. These breeding farms were a sad symbol of the cruelty and brutality of slavery. The well-being of these enslaved individuals was not important to the slave owners who heartlessly made them suffer just to make money. The history of these breeding farms is a reminder of the great injustice and suffering that happened to countless lives during that dark time in human history. At the breeding farm, most of the slaves were women and children who weren't old enough to be sold. There were also a few men whose main job was to make the women pregnant. It was a horrible and disrespectful practice where the slaves had to wear hoods or bags over their heads during these forced encounters so they couldn't see the person they were with. Sadly, this meant that they could end up having sex with someone they knew, like a niece, aunt, sister, or even their own mother without knowing it. The breeders on these farms didn't care about the emotions or the family connections of the slaves. The only goal was to make more children who could be sold for money, which was simply one of the highest levels of human objectification. Female slaves were often forced to have sex with strong men so that they could have tough children who could handle hard work. It's heartbreaking to say, but it didn't stop there. Some owners and their friends would also force themselves on these female slaves whenever they wanted, treating them even worse. The white slave owners tried to justify their actions by telling themselves they were helping the slaves. They believed it was better for the female slaves to be with them than with black men whom they saw as animalistic and lesser beings. But in reality, it was all just a cruel and exploitative excuse for their terrible behavior. The horrible practice of slavery and slave breeding also caused a split in the market based on skin color. Those with lighter skin were seen as more valuable and could fetch higher prices. Many of these light-skinned female slaves were made to work as house servants, while some were forced into degrading and inhumane professions like prostitution, which some white people saw as a viable way to make money. These troubling facts reveal the unimaginable struggles faced by female slaves, who were treated as objects during a dark period in history, when people were bought and sold based on their skin color and desires of their oppressors. Upon reaching the age of 15, enslaved males underwent their initial inspection, and in some cases, even younger boys were subjected to this challenging ordeal. Those perceived as underdeveloped had their testicles removed, leading to their sale in the market or their assignment to work on the farm. Each enslaved male was compelled to impregnate 12 females annually for 5 years, solely for the purpose of breeding. A distressing example of this brutal practice is evident in the case of a man called Pataseka, who fathered over 200 children during his time as a coerced breeder. These shocking facts reveal the heartbreaking truth of how enslaved men were treated as mere tools for breeding, stripped of their freedom and dignity. To address the alarming death rates among enslaved population, slave owners implemented a disturbing practice that involved coercing young girls to begin bearing children as early as 13 years old. Just imagine the immense burden imposed on these innocent souls at such a tender age. By the time these enslaved women reach age of 20, they were already expected to have experienced childbirth 4 or 5 times. This harrowing reality pushed these women to the brink of exhaustion and subjected them to immense suffering. To compound their suffering, some plantation owners exhibited even greater heartlessness by offering freedom to these women only after they had endured the heartbreak of giving birth to an astonishing total of 15 children. Plantation owners would occasionally employ a chilling and disturbing tactic to boost birth rates by acquiring desirable enslaved women. However, this was not an act born out of kindness. Rather, it was a calculated method to assert further control and dominance over these women, offering them certain privileges while still keeping them in captivity within the household. Despite the apparent privilege, these enslaved women often faced profound suffering inflicted by the master's wife, who harbored envy and resentment towards them. In a truly horrifying incident, a child born of the master's illicit affair with an enslaved woman met a tragic end when the master's wife, consumed by unimaginable cruelty and revenge, beheaded the innocent child. Alexander Scott Withers, a slave farm owner, demonstrated heartlessness by callously selling 2 of his own children who were born from his illicit relationships with enslaved women. Another notorious figure, Robert Lumpkin, was also a slave owner, infamous for his ownership and mistreatment of enslaved individuals. Tragically, individuals like Archibald and Francis Grimke were among the heartbreaking outcomes of slave breeding farms who were born into a world marred by anguish and torment. In the next chapter, we will delve further into the shocking reality of slave breeding and uncover more horrifying details of the maltreatment and dehumanizing experiences endured by African slaves. So, stay tuned to the Black History channel for this eye-opening revelation, and feel free to click on any of the videos showing on your screen to discover more intriguing stories about Black history. See you there!